Chapter 1. The bones beneath Kaleesh, for there was metal, there was bone. Before there was Grievous, there was a name whispered through the canyon winds of a dying world. Kaleesh Jai Shilal, carved into the war chants of his people, that name once rang with pride. But pride fades, flesh fades, and in time only ruin remembers. I speak now of the being who became a ghost in his own skin, whose soul cracked long before his spine. You know the machine, but I remember the man. The sands of Kaleesh did not forgive the weak. Beneath a sun that burned without mercy, the Kaleesh were forged, not born. Each breath was earned through battle, each scar a scripture, each death a song carried into the bones of children. Kaleesh was one of many, until the Yamri came, insects from a world of rot and mirrors. The Yamri descended with starships and lasers, and the stars turned their gaze away. They were not invaders, they were colonizers, and they came with Republic silence. The Jedi did not come, the Senate did not speak. But Kaleesh did, with a war mask carved from a sacred skull and a spear that sang in blood. He rose from the broken villages of the coastal clans, uniting the tribes with fire, oath, and vengeance. He was no king, he was no Jedi, he was something older, a wrath remembered. Each battle pushed the Yamri further from the soil. Each victory cost more than it returned, and when the war ended, the stars again turned blind. The victors of Kaleesh were left with famine, with disease, with graveyards. The victors of Kaleesh were punished for surviving. The Republic, mourning the loss of trade with the Yamri, imposed sanctions on the Kaleesh. Credits were denied. Medicine was withheld. Aid came only in the form of condemnation. And Kaleesh, the hero of a dying people, watched as mothers buried sons in silence. There were no witnesses, no justice, no mercy. There was only memory, and memory is a wound. Kaleesh took up arms again, not against the Yamri, but against history itself. He made the galaxy remember the name of his people: pirate, mercenary, assassin, general. Each new name burned away the last. But the fires did not warm him, not truly, not anymore. He gathered warriors who had nothing left to lose, exiles, outlaws, lost Jedi who had stepped too close to shadow, droids who spoke only in Together they waged war, not for nation, but for vengeance. And at the center of this growing legend was Kaleesh, whose eyes had grown colder than the steel he would one day wear. They called him General Shilal now, and when he walked, even Jedi Masters held their breath. But he had no force, no vision, no prophecy. He had only hate, and hate was enough. It was then, as the stars circled indifferently above him, that a voice arrived. Velvet and Venom, Count Dooku, a fallen Jedi turned shadow priest. He came not with soldiers, but with riddles, not with threats, but with truth. He spoke of the clone wars yet to come, of the Jedi's hypocrisy, of the Republic's decay, and most of all, he spoke of Shila's greatness, what it could become. But every gift from the Sith carries teeth. Dooku offered not coin, but purpose, not peace, but power. He called Kaleesh a symbol of purity, a warrior unsullied by the illusions of the Force. You were not born to bow, he said, but to survive the death of everything that bows. And Shilal believed him. Belief became alliance. Alliance became blood oath. And soon the shuttle was prepared, a vessel to Munilinst, to secret surgery, to strength beyond flesh. But the shuttle never arrived. There was fire, a crash, screams, metal and meat torn asunder. And when the wreckage cooled, the man who had been Kaleesh lay dying beneath twisted steel. His heart beat, but not for long. It was no accident. It was no mercy. It was a ritual. Dooku retrieved what remained, not the body, but the hate. What survived the flames was not Kaiman. It was the echo of a scream too loud for the Force to bear. It was grief made mechanical. It was General Grievous. But before the name, before the armor, before the terror, he was a man kneeling beside the bones of a forgotten people. A man who screamed into the stars and heard no answer. A man who prayed to a force that never came, and something else came instead. The machine has many enemies, but the man had only one. Oblivion. And as the engines of the shuttle that carried his dying body whispered into hyperspace, a prophecy began. To whisper through the Force, not of balance, not of light, but of something stolen, something broken, something that should not have lived. The galaxy would forget the name Kimain Jai Shilo, but the wound he left behind would never close, and the stars above. Kali burned just a little colder. Chapter 2. A prayer of smoke and ash long before fire became circuitry. It was prayer. The Kaleesh knew this well. They burned offerings beneath crimson skies, not to summon gods, but to keep them away. The Force had touched their world once, and then abandoned it. So they burned, they chanted, they wept. And when their prayers were not answered, they sharpened blades. That was the way of Kali, and that was the way of Kaimain. The war against the Yamri was not a war of conquest. It was a war of memory. Every spear that pierced insect flesh carried a name, a mother, a village, a broken grave. The dead were never silent on Kali. They spoke through the fury of those who lived. And the might of Shiliul did not come from strategy. It came from grief. He led without question, not because he was loved, but because he bled more than anyone. He never wore armor. His skin bore the color of rusted stone, his eyes the pale gold of dusklight over corpse fields. His voice was coarse, but not cruel. When he spoke to his warriors, it was never of victory. It was always of vengeance, and vengeance whispered, often enough, becomes sacred. He prayed, to not with words, with silence, with scars. He would kneel before the fire pits where mothers burned the dead, inhaling the smoke until it choked him. Some say he heard voices in those flames, not spirits, but echoes of a time when the stars had not betrayed his people. Others say it was madness. But I, who have lingered where Jedi and Sith both dare not tread, tell you this. Something ancient answered him. Not the light, not the dark. Something colder. The Jedi called the Yamri conflict an internal dispute. They did not intervene. To intervene would be to acknowledge that the Force flowed through beings not chosen by their temples. The Kaleesh were not chosen. They were punished for their strength, for their refusal to kneel, for reminding the galaxy that not all suffering comes with a lesson. So Shilul made them listen. He turned pirates into prophets, warriors into legends. His fleet cobbled together from broken frigates and salvage, struck with precision no star chart could predict. Republic outposts vanished in smoke. Supply lines collapsed like rotted lungs. No declaration of war was ever signed, but war answered anyway. He did not call himself general then. He called himself Avenger. His soldiers worshipped him not as a leader, but as a symbol. They painted their faces with the ash of burned relics, bound their weapons with the bones of fallen kin. Each skirmish was not battle, it was ritual, and each victory another nail in the coffin of peace. He should have died there, gloriously, surrounded by the burning ships of his enemies. But Dooku watched from the shadows. the fallen Jedi once called Master, now moved through the galaxy like a viper through long grass. He saw in Shilel what the Jedi could not, a weapon of will alone, a creature born of abandonment, a symbol that could outlive its own flesh. And so Dooku extended a hand. He offered tools, upgraded starships, intelligence on Republic movements, but beneath each gift was the same whisper: they do not deserve your mercy. The Jedi watched Kali die. The Republic called you savage. The Force chose others. Why not you? Why not? It is a question that kills slowly. The name of Grievous had not yet been spoken, but it lingered in the air like a curse unborn. Dooku promised Sheila a way to ascend beyond the blood and dust, a way to become what the Jedi feared, a way to write the name of Kali in flame across the stars. He told him of a process, enhancement, not death, transformation, cybernetics beyond the crude augmentations of warlords, not merely to repair, but to evolve. The body is finite, Dooku whispered, but your hate is not. And Sheila, tired of watching his people die slow deaths in dust, agreed. He did not know he had just written his own ending. The shuttle that would carry him to his rebirth came veiled in dusklight. It left the smoke of Kali behind, rose through atmosphere, and whispered into hyperspace. It would never arrive. Dooku had already chosen the moment. Explosives ruptured the hull, metal tore, fire screamed, and in the silence that followed, there was only breath, shallow, final, bitter. Sheila did not die, but he did not live. What lay in the wreckage was a shell, and what woke in it, moments later, with trembling breath and broken bone, would never again pray to fire or ash. The last true prayer of Kaiman Jai Sheila was not a word, it was a scream. And the Force, long absent, finally listened, not with mercy, but with hunger. Grievous would awaken soon. But the soul who once knelt beside funeral pyres on Kali was already gone, burned away, replaced not with machinery, but with absence. This is what happens when faith becomes blade. This is what remains when no one answers, and far beneath the stars of Munilinst, in a chamber cold as the grave, metal fingers would soon twitch, and the eyes of a monster would open, not in rage, but in remembrance, and the stars did not weep. They never did. Chapter 3. The eyes of Count Dooku are eyes that see, and there are eyes that choose what to see. Count Dooku possessed the latter vision, not as truth, but as weapon. Where others saw a dying soldier, Dooku saw a vessel. Where others saw a crippled warlord, he saw a prophecy sculpted from pain. And so, when the smoke cleared from the crashed shuttle and the ruin of Kimane lay gasping in firelight, it was not death that greeted him, it was Dooku's shadow. He did not come with tears. He did not feign grief. He came with the calm of inevitability. You are not dying, he said, voice low as to mare. You are becoming. He bent to look into what remained of Kaimane's face, and in that gaze, something ancient stirred, not compassion, not cruelty, but possession. There was no choice. There never had been. The shuttle's sabotage was precise, not meant to kill, but to strip, to remove the man and leave only the shape of a monster. It was a Sith baptism, flame instead of water, silence instead of scripture. The Jedi baptize their young in light. The Sith baptize theirs in despair. And Dooku had waited years to find the perfect disciple. He had tried many before. Fallen Jedi, exiled warlords, but none had the right mixture of rage and fracture. None bled from the right wounds. until came pain, until the general who fought without the force, who killed not for pleasure but for memory. Dooku called it purity, Sidious called it useful. Together, they would make him eternal. He was taken to Genos, not to rest, to transform. In a temple of bone and machine, hidden beneath the red dunes, the work began. Dooku did not watch with pity, he watched with reverence. This was not surgery, this was ritual. Flesh was peeled back like false skin, muscle replaced with servos, lungs removed, replaced with a coal-fed furnace, heart shattered, replaced with something colder. The pain was unholy, the screams were endless, but there was no one left to hear them, except Dooku. He stayed through every hour. He did not flinch. When Grievous, yes, that name had now been spoken, awoke for brief moments, choking, twitching, remembering. Dooku was there, a quiet voice in the dark. "You are not broken," he whispered. "You are reborn, rebirth." It is a lie told to corpses. He trained him, personally. Lightsaber combat in all 7 forms. Not through force awareness, but through mimicry, through rage, through stolen memory. Dooku fed him recordings of Jedi Masters. He made him watch how they moved, made him memorize their footwork, their breath. "You must become them to destroy them," he said. And Grievous learned faster than expected. Not because he was gifted, because he had nothing left to lose. He fought like a creature, trying to tear time itself open and crawl back to the day of his betrayal. Each duel was not practice. It was mourning, mourning in the language of blades. Dooku watched, pleased. Sidious observed from a distance, even more pleased. But something went unnoticed. Beneath the programming, beneath the rage, the eyes of Lull still lingered, trapped, watching, and they remembered. They remembered the children who wept beside ash pits. They remembered the smell of burning temples on Kaleesh. They remembered the silence of the stars. Grievous, they thought, was theirs now, a pet warlord for a phantom war. But the soul of Kaimain still trembled inside, screaming through metal lungs. I am not a slave, but he was. The galaxy would soon come to fear him. The Jedi would whisper of a monster who hunted them, who wielded their own sabers against them. But they would never speak of the man who came before. That name was erased. That name no longer served the war. And Dooku, he continued watching. Always, with those eyes, elegant, precise, empty. He did not believe in monsters, he made them. And as Grievous stood at last, towering in his new form, cloak of smoke trailing behind him, coughing from implanted weakness, clutching a stolen blade, Dooku smiled. It was complete, and somewhere in the broken remnants of the Force, something screamed in protest, not for mercy, not for hope, but because this creature should not exist. And yet, he did, and in the dark of Geonosis, the machine took its first full breath. Chapter 4. The crash that was no accident. There are deaths that come with screaming. There are deaths that come with silence. And then there are those that do not come at all. Only the illusion of them, a shadowed ending wrapped around the birth of something unholy. This was such a death. The crash, they called it. A tragic accident, a malfunction, a cost of war. But the truth is colder. The truth has no breath. The crash was not fate. The crash was design. Dooku had planned it. He did not speak of it to Sidious. But the Sith do not need to speak. They breathe deception like air. They feed on sacrifice. They do not wait for destiny. They construct it, brick by agonized brick. When he offered Kamain the promise of restoration, he had already marked the day of his fall. When the shuttle rose above Kali, kissed by the sun of his broken world, the countdown had begun. Within its core, Dooku's agents had placed the charge, small, precise, delayed, enough to rend, not to destroy. The explosion came just as they neared Munilinst orbit, a flash of fire beneath cold stars, flames consuming metal, screams tearing through the void. But not death. That would be mercy. There was no mercy in this story. Only transition. Only subtraction. Kaimain, Jai Sheela, was torn from his body, but he was not allowed to die. They pulled his remnants from the wreckage, what was left of his skull, his heart, one arm twisted and twitching. It was not enough for life, but it was enough for what they needed, and in Dooku's gaze there was no mourning, only calculation. He stood above the burnt form like a priest over an altar. "You are not born to end," he whispered. "You are born to begin again." A ritual had been completed, and now the rebirth would commence. He was taken not to a hospital, not to healing, but to a chamber beneath Geonosis, a laboratory disguised as a sanctum. There the engineers waited, the same beings who built droid armies, the same hands that sculpted death into metal. They welcomed their new work with hollow faces, and the process began. It took days, then weeks. Pain became his new language. The remnants of his nerves were wired into cold exoskeleton. His lungs, now artificial, burned with every breath, not from infection, but design. The pain was intended. It kept him angry. It kept him loyal. It kept him awake. They told him the crash had been a misfortune. They told him he had survived by miracle. They told him this body was a gift. But inside the furnace of his soul, a voice rose. The memory of fire, of falling, of betrayal, and deep within, something broke that would never heal again. Not rage, not grief. Trust. He awoke in fragments. The first time, he screamed, not in terror, in confusion. The body would not obey. It was too tall, too heavy, too cold. He looked down and saw not fingers, but talons, not skin, but armor. His voice cracked like lightning across an open field, modulated, unnatural. His heart pounded, not with blood, but with vengeance. And Dooku was there, smiling, watching the Sith Lord. Told him stories of the Jedi, of their arrogance, of their failure to save Kali. "They let your people burn," he said. "They deemed your cries unworthy of the Force." He painted the Republic as a rotted tree, the Jedi as its diseased roots. And Grievous, yes, he was Grievous now, would be the blade that severed it all. A general, they called him, supreme commander of the separatist droid armies. A title, golden and hollow. But it was not command that Dooku sought to give. It was identity. One sculpted from ruin. They gave him lightsabers trophies from Jedi fallen in war. They gave him combat data, hours of jewels recorded from fallen temples. They even gave him a new cough, implanted weakness meant to mimic suffering, to remind others he was still mortal, still capable of pain. But the truth was simpler. He was neither mortal nor machine. He was the result of war, of fear, of a lie, so old it no longer remembered its own face. He stood at last, tall as myth, heavy with hate, and looked into a mirror. He saw nothing he recognized, and for one breathless moment, a ghost of Kaimain tried to speak, tried to scream, tried to leave, but there was nowhere to go, and so he remained trapped, his memories sealed in a vault of steel and programming, his soul buried beneath protocol, and Dooku, standing behind him, whispered the final command, "Make them pay." And Grievous, Lord of Nothing, did not nod, he simply turned and walked. And in the silence that followed, the Force did not speak, because what stood now was not of the Force. Chapter 5. The Chamber of Cold Rebirth. He did not awaken in light. He awakened in wires, in clamps, in fluid. He floated, first a limbless wraith in a cylinder of green, held up by pumps and bolts. Memory flickered like a damaged flame. There had been a ship, a detonation, screams in his chest, and then the silence, then the humming, then the cold. This chamber was no place of healing. It was not built to soothe. It was a womb of iron, a place of reversal, where death was not the end, but the beginning of something worse. Beneath Geonosis, where the walls still remembered screams from the clone prototypes, he had been buried in pieces and unearthed as a design. Kimain Jai Shilal was gone, but his skull remained, and Dooku stood over it, murmuring to the technicians, the surgeons, the mechanical priests. Their language was technical, their eyes were dry. They sliced bone not for science, but for obedience. They measured fear in volts and hatred in metrics. And they whispered of transformation. The first thing they reconstructed was his chest, a duranium shell shaped to hold a furnace, not a heart. Into this cage they inserted tanks, burners, processors. Then came the arms, not 2, but 4, because pain would not be wielded by halves. Each limb was plated with frick and reforged to grip sabers not as tools, but as symbols. Next came his legs, jointed, spring-loaded, monstrous. They were not meant for balance. They were meant to strike, but the skull that they preserved, not. From mercy, from symbolism. They wanted him to see what he once was. They wanted him to remember. The final touch was the eyes. Not human, not organic. Lenses of sulfur yellow and crimson red, glowing from deep within the helmet. They gave him infrared vision, data analysis, targeting capabilities. But what he saw most clearly was betrayal. He saw Dooku not as a master, but as a puppeteer. And behind Dooku, a shadow that stretched even further, deeper than any star, colder than any code. SIDIOUS. He had not yet met him, but he felt him, a presence unblinking and ancient, watching his rebirth through layers of deception, approving, smiling. It was not enough for the Sith to create a monster. They needed the galaxy to fear it, and so they crafted the myth, General Grievous, the fearsome warlord who killed for sport, who commanded legions, who stalked Jedi through hyperspace. They whispered that he bled green, that he drank Jedi bones. They let the stories grow until they cast shadows over entire systems. And every whisper made him stronger, because the truth was even darker. He did not kill for pleasure. He killed to remember who he had once been. With every Jedi he slaughtered, he reclaimed a piece of what the galaxy had stolen. A planet, a people, a soul. His mind, still flickering with shreds of his past, did not weep for the dead. It searched them for answers, for justice, for himself. But the chamber had changed him. The process was not just physical. Dooku had overseen neural rewiring, programs that trained him even as he slept. They uploaded thousands of duels, patterns, lightsaber forms, countermoves. Every breath a Jedi took was catalogued, and when he awoke, it was as if he had dueled them all. He knew where they would strike before they lifted their blade. The force did not flow through him, but calculation did. He became a mirror of the Jedi's arrogance, a machine refined by their own teachings, and he hated them for it. He chose the name Grievous, not for flair, but for purpose. It was his declaration, his identity. He was not a droid, not a man, not a warrior. He was the wound, the echo of every injustice they had passed over, the shape of every scream they did not hear. And in that chamber of cold rebirth, he vowed to become the voice they could no longer ignore. He stepped from the operating table not as prey, but as predator. The Geonosians bowed, the scientists stepped back, and Dooku smiled. "You are ready," the Count whispered, holding out a lightsaber like a crown. "The galaxy will learn to tremble at your steps." Grievous took it, ignited it. The blade was blue, but in his hands it looked red. The chamber behind him hissed as its gases vented. A womb cracked open, and as he left, the force itself recoiled. Because this was not natural, not destiny, not balance. This was vengeance made flesh. Chapter 6. The blades of the fallen. He did not build a collection. He built a graveyard. The first Jedi to fall beneath his claws died with disbelief, still in his throat, the blue blade falling from his fingers like a sigh. Grievous caught it before it touched the ground, not with reverence, but with calculation. He examined its weight, turned it in his talons, then ignited it. The hum was high, pure. The blade cast no shadow, only light. But in his grip, that light became a weapon of mockery. The blade was kept, the body discarded. So began the ritual, not of trophies, but of theft. Each saber he seized was not a prize, it was a voice, a memory, a piece of what the Jedi had refused to protect. With each stolen weapon, he reassembled his pain. Every kyber crystal he twisted to his will hummed with irony, for it was once bonded in peace, but now sang war. He learned their forms not as disciples, but as Executioner Makashi Gemso, Shien, Ataro, their elegance, their pride, their balance. He studied them like a hunter studies prey prints in the mud. There was no beauty in it anymore, only pattern, weakness, flaws hidden in footwork and tradition, and one by one, he turned them against their creators. The outer rim trembled with whispers, a ghost in smoke, a demon with spinning sabers, a warrior with no force, yet who moved faster than any Jedi. They called him Grievous, but in hushed tones, some called him Jedi Killer. The title pleased him, but it did not satisfy him, for no matter how many sabers he gathered, how many Jedi fell, choking on disbelief, the wound within him, the one left by Hypori, by Dooku, by Sidious, remained raw. The more he destroyed them, the more he needed to destroy. He killed not for power, he killed for proof that they were mortal, that their code could not save them, that their vaunted peace had only bred blindness. And so he began to display the sabers, not for glory, but as warning. Inside the command chamber of the invisible hand, they hung like haunted wind chimes, lining the walls like teeth inside the mouth of some predator god. No Jedi entered without hearing the whisper of lost comrades. No clone trooper passed without a glance of dread. Each saber was marked with the date and system of death. Some still bore carbon scarring from the final blow. Others had been broken, fused, reforged into new configurations. He wielded not to but for sabers in combat, and when that was not enough, he carried more in hidden compartments, launching them mid-duel with mechanical precision. He fought not as a swordsman, but as a storm, every motion calculated, every breath hissing from his cybernetic lungs. And yet, within the storm, there remained a spark, a memory flickering. He remembered one blade most of all. Its hilt was worn, the activation plate smoothed from years of calm use. It had belonged to a Jedi Master who had once tried to speak to him. Not fight, not lecture, but truly see him. She had called him brave. She had laid down her saber in surrender. He killed her anyway, but he kept her saber apart from the others. Never used it, never showed it. It remained locked away in his personal chamber, suspended in a small containment field, not humming, but quiet, almost listening, sometimes in the stillness between battles, when the ship groaned through hyperspace, and the clones moved in silence below. He would stare at it, and for a moment, something in his breath would catch, a glitch, a flicker, a ghost of a man buried beneath all the plates and plasma, and then the rage would return. Sidious and Dooku encouraged his collection. They knew what it did to the Jedi. Every fallen saber whispered of failure, and the Jedi, protectors of legacy, began to fracture beneath it. Doubts spread. Survivors fled. Padawans wept over masters they never found. Even the High Council grew nervous, speaking his name in fearful meetings, but they still did not understand. Grievous was not a side, effect of war. He was its purpose. Where the Sith sought to corrupt and twist, he simply destroyed. He brought no temptation, no lies, no offers, only the truth sharpened, spinning, hissing in the air. The Jedi fell not to darkness, they fell to the sound of their own sabers turning against them. Chapter 7. The fire beneath Hyperiot began in the ash of deception. The planet Hypori, a graveyard masquerading as a battlefield, had once been lush, with wind-swept plains and crystalline rivers, but the war, as always, had no regard for beauty. It chewed through the surface with durasteel jaws, leaving behind nothing but fractured bunkers, scorched metal, and shattered droids, and buried beneath it all, something ancient was stirring. The Jedi came in force, 7 of them, blades, gleaming, armor shining with Republic hope. They believed it was another skirmish, another strike against the droid factories swelling across the outer rim. They did not know that they were walking into a furnace. They did not know they were being fed to a myth. The separatist ambush was total, an orbital bombardment crippled. Their fleet, before it could land, the droids descended like locusts. Coordinated, precise, endless. The Jedi fought bravely, but Hypori was not a battlefield. It was a crucible, and at the center of it, waiting like a phantom in the dust, was the thing that had once been Kimain Jai Shilo. He emerged from the smoke like a ghost in metal armor, flanked by Magna Guards and cloaked in nothing but hate. The Jedi saw his shape and hesitated, not out of fear, but confusion. He bore no Force presence. He was not Sith. He was not dark side. He was something else, something colder. The first to charge him died before his saber left its sheath. The second lost his hand before he could parry. The third turned to flee, and was crushed under Grievous's heel. They tried to regroup. To surround him, he split his arms. 4 blades ignited, and in the furnace of Hypori, he burned away the lie of Jedi supremacy. He fought not with elegance, but with overwhelming speed, his arms spinning in whirls of fire, his feet pounding across the Durocrete with inhuman weight. He parried entire forms with a single motion, countered feints with predictive precision, and struck with such force that sabers shattered in defense. They did not die poorly, but they died. Only one survived. Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi, pulled from the wreckage by clone forces just before the Separatists could close the trap. His wounds were grave. His words were worse. "There is something new," he said through cracked breath. Something, not Sith, not Jedi, not alive. The council was shaken. This was not a Sith Lord, hiding behind shadows. This was a monster who wanted to be seen. Hypori became legend overnight. Jedi whispered the name Grievous with tightening throats. Clone commanders updated their threat charts. The Senate demanded answers, but the Separatists said nothing. Dooku, in secret, smiled, for this was the moment he had been building toward. Hypori was not just Grievous's debut. It was the death of illusion, the illusion that Jedi were invincible, the illusion that the Separatists were merely political, the illusion that the clone wars would end cleanly. From this day forward, every Jedi in the field felt the cold possibility that they might be next, that a creature without the Force could outmatch them, outthink them, outkill them, and Grievous knew it. He relished it. He studied the holo recordings of the battle, not out of pride, but improvement. Every strike that cost him unnecessary energy was removed, every flaw in his approach eliminated. His body was not bound by fatigue, his mind not dulled by emotion. Each confrontation became a test, each Jedi a puzzle. He was not just a warrior, he was the war perfected, but beneath the armor, beneath the scarred memory of Hypori, something else was growing, something darker than hatred. Joy. In those final moments, before his victims fell, he began to feel something he could no longer name. It was not the pleasure of victory. It was not satisfaction. It was hunger, the kind that no battlefield could quench. Hypori lit that fire, and Sidious, watching from the shadows, beyond even Dooku, knew what he had forged. A living scourge, a monster that would soften the galaxies. Heroes before the true darkness fell. Grievous would pave the way, and the Jedi would fall, not with screams, but with silence, with sabers plucked from their grasp, with one final breath, choked not by rage, but by confusion. How? They would ask, and the war would answer. Hypori, Chapter 8. The echoes of Geonosisti, bones of Geonosis, still whispered, long after the dust of its first battle had settled, after clone troopers buried their dead in shallow graves and Jedi limped. Away from the ruin of their illusions, the red sands remained soaked with the memory of fire. It was here that the Clone Wars had begun. It was here that the Jedi bled beside the men they were sworn to lead. And it was here, years later, that the monster returned to dance in the graves of the fallen. General Grievous had not forgotten Geonosis. How could he? He studied its failure like scripture, not the failure of the Separatists, but of the Jedi. Their noble charge, their noble deaths, how quickly they were overwhelmed, how fragile their formations, how loud their screams. It was not a battlefield, it was a testament, a symbol that they could fall. Now he returned to it, not as the lurking shadow of Hypori, but as a roaring storm of steel. No longer an experiment, no longer a rumor, he was the hammer of Separatist power. And Geonosis would fall again, not because it held strategic value, but because it was sacred, a shrine to broken hope. The Republic detected the movement too. Late their scans showed a small incursion, a factory reactivated, perhaps a tactical sweep. They sent a detachment of Jedi and clones, not a full legion, but enough It would not be enough. Grievous had not come to skirmish, he had come to bury. Ghosts, he struck before sunrise. His Magna Guards descended first, cutting through perimeter outposts with clockwork brutality. Then came the droid legions, tens of thousands, freshly manufactured, marching with silent obedience through the ravines. And finally, the general, descending, like a demon through the clouds, his ship crashing through the atmosphere like a falling blade. He did not wait for the droids. He never waited. He hunted. Jedi first, always the Jedi. Ahsoka Tano, Tarsia, Benink, Utrilla. Names burned into the databanks. Faces committed to memory. Styles memorized. Weaknesses marked. He found them, and he tore through them like a storm through dry leaves. Every duel was a ritual now, a reenactment of Hypori. He studied their form, mirrored their stances, and then shattered them in half. He took no joy in the kill, not anymore. That had faded, replaced with something colder. Necessity, the Jedi must die. All of them, they were the poison that had infected the galaxy with hope. They were the reason the Republic still clung to illusions of order. So Grievous burned Geonosis down again, not just to defeat the Jedi, but to remind them that nowhere was sacred, not even the place where the war had begun. Republic reinforcements came too late. They found only ash. The Jedi detachment was gone. Their bodies were arranged in the sand, surrounded by a spiral of lightsabers. A warning, a monument, a symbol carved in the style of the Kaleesh death rites. For though Grievous had long buried his name, some rituals never died, and above it all, in orbit, the general broadcast, one message, no encryption, no secrecy, just a voice of iron and hate. The war began here. Let it end the same way. You are not protectors, you are prey. Panic rippled through the Republic command. Jedi Masters convened in emergency sessions. Some called for total pursuit, others urged caution. They were tired, fractured, slowly breaking. Grievous had no need to kill them all at once. He would bleed them dry. One cell, one planet, one mistake at a time, and Geonosis, the birthplace of war, became the echo chamber of its inevitable end. For Sidious watched and said nothing. He needed no victory here, only despair. Every Jedi death made his coming reign simpler. Every Republic loss made their faith weaker, and Grievous, unaware of the strings above him, carried out this will with perfect obedience. Not because he was loyal, but because he believed. He believed the Jedi were weak. He believed the Republic was rotten. He believed he was the future, a perfect fusion of will and weapon. And yet, deep inside, beneath the armor and hatred, something flickered, not regret, not mercy, but confusion. For in his dreams, when the pain receded and the screaming stopped, he did not see his enemies. He saw a mask, a bone-white face carved from the skull of a war god, the face of Qui-Gon, the face he had buried, and still, it waited, beneath the metal, beneath the title, beneath General Grievous. There was still something lost, something that whispered through the echoes of Gino SIS. Chapter 9, The Citadel of Smoke and Sparks. The Citadel was not built for war. It was built for memory. Before the Clone Wars, the Jedi knew it by another name, the Citadel prison complex of Lola Seyu, a fortress buried within a crust of volcanic rock, wrapped in molten rivers and atmosphere too toxic to breathe, ancient, even by Republic standards. It had once been a relic of the Outer Rim's darkest eras, a place designed not just to hold prisoners, but to erase them. It was said no one escaped the Citadel until the Jedi did. Years ago, Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi had broken into the complex to free a captured Jedi general. The Citadel had been abandoned afterward, deemed too dangerous, too unstable, too full of ghosts. But Grievous saw in it a purpose. He saw in it a mirror. He returned to Lola Sayu not to guard it, but to resurrect it. Where others saw ruin, he saw perfection, a fortress designed for confinement, isolation, and obedience. What better place to forge a weapon than where hope had once been murdered by stone? Grievous moved in silence. The galaxy watched battles on Umbara, Ryloth, and Salukami. But in the shadows of Lola Sayu, the true work began. He reconstructed the Citadel, not as a prison, but as a crucible, a place where Jedi were broken, not slain. The droid army dragged captives from fallen outposts and shattered temples. Not all were warriors. Some were Padawans, healers, archivists. Grievous did not discriminate. He caged them in the molten heart of the Citadel and watched how quickly their hope eroded. No fire, no light, no force to comfort them. The air was poison. The walls were scarred with the names of the long dead. And in every corridor, the sound of metal footsteps echoed a promise that death would not be swift. Grievous had always been a killer, but here he became a teacher. He spoke to the prisoners, not with anger, but cold conviction. He did not scream. He explained, methodically, precisely, why the Jedi had failed, why the war would end, why the Force was a lie. Some Jedi resisted, some meditated in silence, others broke, and those who broke were taken below, to the laboratories that stank of oil and fire, the hidden places where separatist scientists worked alongside cybernetic surgeons. For the Citadel was not only a place of death, it was a forge. There, Grievous conducted his most sacred experiments, not on Jedi, but on the philosophy of war. Could the Force be removed? Could a Jedi be remade in steel? Could obedience be engineered? He tested not with hatred, but with cold faith. Each failed subject was disposed of without malice. Each success studied, and in the dim reflection of his work, he saw something that disturbed even him. Not victory, but repetition. Each new subject, each broken Jedi, each twisted husk. All of them began to resemble him. More than once, he stood before a shattered prisoner, strung in wires, stripped of voice, limbs replaced, eyes vacant, and saw his own reflection. He killed those ones quickly, not out of cruelty, but to silence. The echo, one such prisoner, lasted longer than the rest. A young Mirialan Padawan, captured on Felucia, scarred but defiant. She spoke of the Force with reverence, even in chains. She mocked his voice, told him he sounded like a machine choking on lies. Grievous did not strike her. Instead, he listened, watched, waited. She did not break. She sang, even as her cell filled with smoke. Even as her breath turned to ash, she sang a Jedi hymn, a lullaby, meant for initiates, barely remembered even in the temple. It stirred something, not memory, not sorrow, but confusion. For in that song, Grievous felt something impossible. Recognition, a fragment of a battlefield, long buried. A voice, his mother's, singing to him beneath the twin moons of Kali. Before the war, before the armor, before the name General, he left her cell and gave the order for incineration. He could not afford doubt. Not here, not now. He watched the smoke rise into the red sky of Lola Sayu. watched it swirl above the citadel like a dying prayer, and then he turned to the next prisoner, for there were always more, always another Jedi to test, another failure to correct, another chance to perfect the machine that war demanded. The citadel roared with fire, but Grievous felt only silence within, a silence that even his roaring lungs could not fill, a silence that whispered, "You are the prison, and you were built not to hold others, but to hold what you once were." Chapter 10. The Hands That Do Not Tremble. The hands that held his blade had once been living. Once they had gripped the skulls of rival warriors, pressed against the breast of a dying consister, drawn symbols in the sands of Kaleesh as the twin suns bled behind the cliffs. But now those hands, jointed, inhuman, surgical, moved with a terrible serenity. There was no tremor, no hesitation, no fatigue. When Grievous struck, it was pure calculation, not passion, not instinct, design. He had once believed that perfection would come in the form of strength, stronger armor, sharper claws, faster reflexes. But deep beneath his alloyed frame, he had begun to understand the deeper truth. The war did not want strength. The war wanted purity. No hesitation, no fear, no mercy. The flesh trembles, the mind questions. But a machine endures. A machine does what is required. A machine cannot be persuaded by doubt or paralyzed by sorrow. And so he remade himself again. Every time he returned to the surgeons, it was not to repair, but to improve. Remove another relic of weakness, replace another reminder of mortality. His lungs had once been organs. Now they were fire chambers. His eyes had once blinked. Now they glowed. His heart had once bled. Now it was silent. Grievous, the general, was now Grievous. The weapon, but in becoming that weapon, something else emerged, something sidious. Had seen from the beginning, fear not fear, within Grievous, but the fear Grievous created, Jedi, who once laughed at the clumsy droid army, now whispered his name. Clone commanders requested extra detachments when they learned he was near. Civilians fled from entire sectors at the rumor of his presence. He was not just a commander, he was an omen, a sign that a world would burn, a sign that no matter how strong the Jedi became, the war would always find them. On Saleucami, he executed a Jedi counselor and her clones in front of a separatist parade. On Deconimoidia, he crushed a gunship underfoot to make a point to his own captains. On Rada, he left no survivors, not even among his own troops. It was said he no longer spoke during battle. He only breathed, that rasping, guttural sound, like a dragon choking on its own flame. It haunted the corridors of starships. It echoed through burning cities. Even in Republic Senate briefings, his breath was used as a warning. If you hear it, run. But there was still one place where the war had not yet reached, one battlefield. Grievous had never walked, Coruscant, the heart of the Republic, the nest of the Jedi. He dreamed of it, not in sleep, for he no longer slept, but in systems of predictive calculation. He saw the spires of the Jedi Temple split in two by his blades. He saw the Senate Rotunda burning beneath his feet. He saw statues of peace toppled by droid. Fire dot, and in the center of it all, a throne of durasteel, not for him, but for the war itself. A throne where victory meant silence, where no more orders needed to be given, where no more Jedi needed to fall, where the galaxy would become what he had become, cold, functional, obedient. He did not dream of ruling. he dreamed of ending. But the Jedi still endured, still retreated, still resisted, still hoped, and so he pressed harder, on the forest moons, on the icy cliffs of Megiddo, in the black oceans of Camino. He adapted, innovated, replaced his tacticians, upgraded his neural systems, modified his hands again, now capable of redirecting lightsabers mid-air dot in every motion. He killed not only life, but possibility. He was no longer a reflection of his enemies. He was what remained when they were gone. When Anakin Skywalker heard his name, his jaw tensed. When Mace Windu heard his name, he prepared for losses. When Yoda heard his name, he listened. For the old Jedi Master knew this was no ordinary Sith experiment. This was the future, brutal, breathless, and without regret. The hands that did not tremble would one day grip the galaxy by the throat, and the Jedi would not stop it with wisdom. Only war, only blood, only silence, and Grievous was waiting for them, their chapter. 11. The bones of the sky said the war was still young, but in the black seas between the stars, it had already grown old. There were too many wrecks now, ships with no names, no beacons, just the broken ribs of forgotten fleets drifting through the cold. Starfighters spun endlessly with cockpit glass frozen in splinters. Medical frigates ruptured like rotted fruit. Battle cruisers floated upside down, their engines trailing ribbons of metal and ash dot the sky. Once a field of promise had become a graveyard, and Grievous ruled this sky with hands made of ruin. He moved among the wreckage, not as a scavenger, but as a judge. Each broken hull was a question, each destroyed Jedi transport an answer. In these dark corridors of orbital decay, he found clarity. No council, no votes, no negotiations, only wreckage, proof that strength could be engineered, that loyalty could be programmed, that destiny could be cut apart. The Jedi could not see it. Not truly. They still believed the war was something outside them, a poison spreading through the galaxy. But the truth was worse. The war was already within. They carried it into battle every time they drew their blades. They fed it with every clone they commanded, every order they gave. They sharpened it with every lie they told themselves about peace. And Grievous was only the reflection. He did not hate them. He corrected them, like a bone setter re-breaking a crooked limb, like a flame cauterizing a wound, like a blade ending a mistake. In orbit above Felucia, he crushed a carrier filled with Padawan reinforcements. Before they reached the surface, their screams did not echo. There is no sound in vacuum, only the vibration in the hull, in the Roach asteroid belt. He ambushed a stealth convoy meant to supply Jedi outposts along the outer rim. The escort cruisers ignited like fireflies. The relief food, the Bacta, the crystals, the holocrons, all vented into void. No survivors, no message, no need. The message was his presence. The Chancellor called them setbacks. The Jedi called them tragedies. Grievous called them progress. But beneath the layers of iron and command, something deeper stirred, something older than war. He felt it as he drifted above the ruin of the Cymirth defense fleet. He felt it when he walked through the shattered bridge of a Veneta-class cruiser on fire from within. A question, not from within. From beyond, not a voice, not a whisper. A pressure something was watching. Something ancient, patient, circling just outside his awareness, like a predator in a dying orbit. He had no word for it, but the Force did balance. The war was nearing its center, And he was not at the center of it. He was a knife, a hand, a servant. The real architects did not breathe fire like he did. They did not kill with blades. They watched from shadows, cloaked in prophecy, cloaked in robes, cloaked in lies. Grievous had always believed the Jedi were the enemy, but now he wondered who had given him the breath that burned, who had replaced his hands with claws, who had chosen his enemies, his orders, his path. Was it Sidious? Was it Dooku? Was it the war itself, whispering to him through every broken ship, every dead clone, every drifting bone in the sky? He looked down at his reflection in the shattered viewport of the destroyer Malevolence, now lost in the ghost nebula. No face, no flesh, no certainty, only the war, only the mission, only the next blade, only the next world to burn. And so he descended, again to a new battle, to another star, to another star, to Coruscant. He would bring the storm to the heart of peace. The bones of the sky would fall like rain, and in the ruins, the true war, the final war, would begin. Chapter 12. The Claws. Beneath the throne, they thought the war was far away. Coruscant, the crown of the Republic, stood untouched, gleaming like a promise. Its spires reached for the stars, its skylanes swirled in perfect order, and its people believed they were safe. War, they thought, was something that happened out there to clones, to systems whose names they could not pronounce. But the claws of war had never left the capital. They had been digging upward the whole time, from the underworld, from the slums and forgotten levels, from the silence beneath Senate halls and the whispers behind Jedi walls. The war had always been here, and now Grievous came to prove it. He fell like a wound through the atmosphere. A black meteor, cloaked in flame. Republic cruisers scrambled to intercept him, but they were too slow. Starfighters spiraled after his transport like insects chasing a storm. The Battle of Coruscant had begun. Thousands of separatist ships punched through the orbital blockade, their engines screaming like the cries of the dead. Clones and droids collided in the void, locked in endless fire and debris. Above, the sky turned to ash. Below, the people screamed, not because they were dying, but because they had finally realized they could. This was no siege. This was a message. The Jedi Temple shook. The Senate Tower groaned. The shadows beneath the Chancellor's office deepened, and Grievous, in the center of it all, moved like a prophecy fulfilled. His eyes burned in the smoke. His blades opened like wings. His rage echoed through every corridor he entered. He wasn't here to win. He was here to rip away the illusion of safety. He tore through clone battalions with the precision of a blade honed over years of violence. He moved past barricades, vaporized tanks, shattered barricades of light and metal. He was not death. He was correction. He had learned every weakness of the Republic, their bureaucracy, their pride, their dependence on Jedi guardians, who had long forgotten how to fear. And now he brought them their reckoning. The Chancellor was the prize, not because of who he was, but because of who would come for him. Grievous knew the trap was baited both ways. He could feel it. The Force did not speak to him in words, but in heat, in instinct, in the flicker of danger just beyond his reach. The Chancellor was not helpless. He was not a lamb in a tower, but Grievous did not care. He would take him anyway. He would rip the throne from beneath the Republic's feet. He stormed the tower, his guards flanking him like wraiths in Durasteel. Red-armored clones died on impact. Jedi sent to intercept him were cut down, their lightsabers crashing to the floor like falling stars. One screamed his name as he fell, not in fear, but in recognition. Kaleesh. Grievous paused only for a moment. A flicker of memory, a desert, a mask, a name long buried. Then he crushed the Jedi's throat with a kick and kept moving. The Chancellor's chamber loomed ahead. Grievous slammed through the blast doors with a shriek of metal and flame. And there he was, alone, calm, hands folded, eyes gleaming. Palpatine Grievous did not speak. He reached out with his clawed hand, but the Chancellor only smiled, and behind him, from the dark, stepped to Jedi.obi-1 Kenobi. Anakin Skywalker. The war had delivered him everything he wanted. A hostage, a duel, a confrontation between prophecy and wrath. The chamber fell silent as sabers ignited. Grievous said nothing. He only opened his cloak. 4 arms extended, 4 blades hummed to life. This was not war, this was destiny, and it would be written in the blood of the chosen. Chapter 13. The flames between names. The room burned with light, not sunlight, nor flame, but the blazing convergence of lightsabers drawn in fury, honor and fear. In the Chancellor's high chamber, deep within the peak of Coruscant's tallest spire, time seemed to halt, and in that breathless pause, 3 weapons of fate stood poised. Obi-Wan Kenobi, whose blade remembered mercy. Anakin Skywalker, whose blade forgot it. General Grievous, whose blades had no memory at all. He came at them without war cries, without flourish, without hesitation. His 4 sabers spun in perfect arcs, a hurricane of stolen light. The blades of dead Jedi now sought to kill their kin, driven by the rage of a warrior who had abandoned his name. Grievous moved like a storm given bones. Sparks flew from marble walls. Obi-Wan was the first to meet him, his blue blade the calm center of the tempest. He knew Grievous knew his rhythms, his weight, his fury. They had met before in battle, but never like this, never with the fate of the Chancellor and the Jedi both hanging in the breath between strikes. Obi-Wan parried a flurry of blows, stepping backward, drawing Grievous away from Anakin. He fought like the ocean, resilient, adaptive, endless in his endurance. But the storm pressed on. Grievous struck with claws and sabers, with rage and precision, with a fury carved from death and rebuilt by Sith alchemy. His armor hissed and groaned with each twist of his monstrous frame. Every strike he landed echoed with the vengeance of 1,000 battlefields. Anakin leaped into the fray. He did not fight like Obi-Wan. He did not wait. He did not measure. He burned. His blade came down like thunder, driven by raw power, not discipline. He moved not to protect but to punish. His breath quickened. His eyes narrowed. Grievous blocked, parried, reversed. Anakin pressed harder. The chamber shuddered as they clashed. Obi-Wan could feel at the edge. Anakin fought on, the line between righteous fury and something darker. Each movement from him was just slightly too fast, slightly too eager. There was no serenity in his form, no restraint. Grievous saw it, and he laughed, not with his voice, but with every move, with every deflection that lured Anakin deeper into the fire, with every clash that made him forget why he'd come. The warrior who had once been Kamain Jai Shiliel saw in Skywalker a reflection. He, too, had once fought to protect. He, too, had lost everything. He, too, had been rebuilt into something useful, and now, like him, Skywalker would be turned into a weapon. Obi-Wan moved between them. forcing Grievous back with a sudden burst of force energy. Debris shattered against the walls. Smoke coiled through the chamber. Grievous staggered. One of his arms sparked severed at the joint. Obi-Wan pressed forward, swinging with precision. Not to kill, but to disable. Grievous blocked, spinning with 3 remaining sabers, but something faltered. The limb that had once held the blade of Master Tukadern now hung useless. His body was betraying him metal fatigue, circuits burnt from previous encounters. He tried to retreat, but Anakin blocked the path. The 2 Jedi cornered him, and still he would not yield. He flared his torso open, revealing a flurry of blasters hidden beneath his armor. A desperate barrage erupted. Blue bolts danced through the chamber like lightning. Anakin deflected some, Obi-Wan deflected more. But one bolt grazed the Chancellor's cheek. A warning, a whisper, a thread pulled in the dark. Anakin saw it, saw the wound, the blood, the vulnerability of the man who had offered him secrets in the night, the man who called him son, and something inside Anakin snapped. He lunged forward, saber high, eyes aflame. His strike came down with devastating force cleaving through Grievous's final guard. Obi-Wan shouted, but it was too late. The saber pierced Grievous's side. He dropped to one knee. Steam hissed from the wound. Sparks sprayed from his chest. He stared at Anakin, and for a moment, his eyes were not the eyes of a machine. They were the eyes of a warrior from the sands of Kaleesh, of a general who buried his brothers, of a soul that had forgotten what it meant to be whole. He did not scream. He did not beg. He simply watched Anakin, and then he fell. The sabers extinguished. The silence returned, but it was not peace. It was only the end of a chapter. For the real war had always been deeper, and as Anakin stood over the broken body, chest heaving, fists clenched, Palpatine rose behind him quiet, smiling, watching the flames between names begin to burn. Chapter 14. The Emperor's smile. The war had not ended. It had only changed its skin. The droid body of General Grievous smoldered in silence, collapsed like a shattered idol in a temple that no longer believed in salvation. The Chancellor's chamber was still, the roar of battle paused by the illusion of victory. But the true weapon in that room was not Grievous. It had never been Grievous. The true danger had not fallen. It had risen. Palpatine stood tall, the blood on his cheek already drying, his robes torn just enough to appear vulnerable, yet noble. His gaze flickered toward the broken corpse of the separatist leader with no pity, no reverence, only calculation. He had orchestrated every step of the war, every blade drawn, every clone deployed, every Jedi death, all part of the spiral that led to this moment. And now, the trap was almost complete. He turned to Anakin Skywalker with a smile that was not born of gratitude, but of satisfaction. "You saved me, my boy," he said softly, his voice cracked just enough to seem human. "You've done what even the Council could not. You've ended the war." Anakin didn't reply. His chest still rose and fell with the rhythm of fury. He had struck down Grievous, not as a Jedi, but as something else, something closer to the shadow that had been haunting him in dreams. The scream of Padme dying, the temple in flames, the guilt, the ache, the fear. Obi-Wan spoke instead. "We need to inform the Council. The war is almost over, but Dooku's allies may still act." Palpatine's face did not change, but the lines of his mouth bent slightly, tightening like a snare. He stepped closer to Anakin, placing a hand on the young knight's shoulder. "You don't need them anymore," he whispered. Anakin turned. To him, confused, Palpatine's eyes softened with what looked like sorrow. They do not trust you, Anakin. They never have, but I do. I have always seen your greatness. They see a blunt weapon. I see the future of the galaxy. Obi-Wan frowned. Anakin, come with me, he said carefully. There is more work to be done, but Anakin hesitated. Palpatine stepped between them. You deserve rest, my boy. Let Master Kenobi carry the burden now. He always believed he was your superior. Let him prove it. Obi-Wan said nothing, but the look in his eyes spoke everything. He had seen the Chancellor's hands move too carefully. He had heard the serpent's voice beneath the praise, and he feared, more than ever, that Anakin would not hear it. That night, Anakin returned to his chambers. The war was ending, but inside him, another had begun. He paced in silence. The air in the room felt thick, like a breath held too long. He looked out over Coruscant, where the fires of war still blinked like dying stars. He remembered Padme's face, her voice, her scream, and then the Chancellor's. Whisper returned. Only I can help you save her. He closed his eyes. The Jedi had offered him rules. Palpatine offered him answers. The Jedi had offered him lectures. Palpatine offered him power. The Jedi had told him to let go. Palpatine told him he could control death itself. A knock echoed. Anakin turned. It was Padme. She rushed into his arms before a word was spoken. He held her tightly, more tightly than before, as though letting her go would kill her instantly. Her breath against his neck was the only warmth he believed in. She said she had heard rumors that Grievous was dead, that the war might finally end. He didn't answer. He only asked, "Do you trust me?" She smiled, but it trembled. Always. He pulled back and stared into her eyes. "I won't lose you." She touched his face gently, but she didn't understand the fire behind his words. That night, Anakin returned to Palpatine, not as a Jedi, not as a soldier, but as a seeker. Palpatine welcomed him into his private chamber, deep beneath the Senate, where even the Force felt thinner muted by old stone and darker rituals. The lights were low, the silence deeper. "I know what you are," Anakin said. Palpatine smiled, not with shame, not with denial, but with relief. "I hoped you would, Darth Sidious," Anakin whispered, as if naming a ghost. "You're the Sith Lord." "And yet," Palpatine said calmly, "here you are." Anakin did not ignite his saber. He did not call the council. He waited. "Tell me," he said, "how do I save her?" Palpatine's smile deepened. "Only through me can you learn to prevent death. Not from a Jedi, not from books, but from one who has mastered the true nature of the Force." Anakin stepped forward, slowly. "Teach me." The darkness pressed closer. "Are you willing to do what must be done?" Palpatine asked. The answer did not come from Anakin's mouth. It came from his silence. From the way he did not say no. Palpatine saw it. The moment the sun set on Skywalker's soul, he placed a hand on Anakin's shoulder once more. And now it was not affection. It was claiming. "Soon, the Jedi will move against me. They fear what I have taught you. When they strike, you must stand with me. You must choose." Anakin did not blink. "I have already chosen." And in that chamber of echoes, beneath the Senate that would soon burn, a new Sith was born not through seduction, but through the fear of love lost. Not with hatred, but with desperation dressed in prophecy. The Emperor's smile would now stretch across 1,000 systems, and in the center of it, the Chosen One began to fall. Chapter 15. When the temple burns, the Jedi temple stood as it had for 1,000 years, its spires catching the morning sun like the blades of watchful sentinels. Its walls hummed with the voices of the past-of masters and padawans, of wars long ended, of peace hard-earned. But beneath the polished stone, beneath the sacred texts and endless archives, there was now only silence. It was not the stillness of meditation. It was the stillness of fate. Anakin Skywalker stood in the council chamber. Alone, he had told them nothing. He had sat among them that morning as a soldier, as a general, as the chosen one. But in truth, he had come as a spy, as an assassin, the shadow of the dark yet to come. The council had debated endlessly whether to arrest the Chancellor, whether he had grown too powerful, whether the Force was slipping from their grasp. But Anakin had already decided. He had seen the way forward, not with clarity, but with fire. He stepped down from the chamber, his boots echoing along the polished floor. The statues of great Jedi lined the hallway, frozen, eternal, blind. Their marble eyes seemed to watch him, to judge him. But he no longer felt their gaze. He no longer needed their blessing. He returned to the Chancellor. He found him not in fear, but in readiness. "They will come for you," Anakin said. Palpatine nodded. "Yes, and when they do, we will finish what the Jedi could never complete. We will bring peace to this galaxy." The holocron flickered to life. "Mace Windu, the Chancellor is under arrest," the voice said, calm and cold. "Stay out of this, Skywalker. It is the will of the Council." But Anakin's silence was not consent. By the time Windu arrived in the Chancellor's office with 3 Jedi Masters at his side, Palpatine was already waiting, his hands folded, his face serene, as if he had rehearsed this moment for decades. And he had. What followed was not a battle. It was a revelation. Blades ignited, screams echoed, and then only to remain Windu and Sidious, locked in a blur of crimson and violet. The Chancellor's office, once a throne of galactic order, now burned with lightning and hatred. Anakin arrived as the duel reached its apex. Windu had disarmed the Sith. Sidious knelt, face twisted in agony, lightning turned against him. The Shadowed Master pleaded for his life. He spoke of treason, of corruption, of the Jedi seeking power. But Anakin only heard one thing. He must live. He knows how to save her. Windu raised his blade to strike. Anakin's breath caught, and then a scream. A flash of light, and Windu fell from the window, cast down by the Chosen One's hand. The Force recoiled. The temple wept. Palpatine rose, his voice no longer cracked or broken, but triumphant and eternal power. Unlimited power. The last mask fell. Anakin knelt. "What is thy bidding, my master?" Palpatine's voice was soft now, like silk over a blade. "Rise, Darth Vader." The name fell like a seal over Anakin's soul. Palpatine wasted no time. "Go to the Jedi Temple. Do not hesitate. Show no mercy. Every Jedi must fall, even the young." Anakin said nothing, but he rose, and he obeyed that night. The stars bore witness to the darkest hour the Jedi had ever known. From the temple's gates marched the 501st clones, loyal to the Republic, now commanded by a traitor cloaked in black. The sentries did not resist. They recognized Skywalker. They did not expect what came next. The blade ignited blue at first, then red in spirit. Children screamed. Lightsabers clashed. Masters fell in defense of the archives, the younglings, the sacred places of the Jedi's soul. But they had not prepared for betrayal from within, for death at the hands of the very one they had once called the Chosen One. The Grand Temple, the heart of the Order, burned, its towers collapsed, its libraries smoldered, and in the Hall of the Thousand Fountains, the waters ran red. Anakin found the younglings last huddled together in the council chamber, staring up at the man they believed would save them. Master Skywalker, a boy said, "There are too many of them. What are we going to do?" The blade answered, "By dawn, the temple was ashdot elsewhere across the stars." Order 66 echoed like a cursed hymn on Felucia alla Secura, turned for help and was gunned down by her own troops. On Saliukami, Saint's Alley was caught in an explosion, orchestrated by her men. On Cato Nymodia, Plo Koon's fighter was blasted from the sky by those he had led for years. Across Kashyyyk, Dopao, Megiddo, and beyond Jedi after Jedi fell, not in battle, but in betrayal. The Jedi were not hunted, they were erased. And the galaxy did not scream, it watched. The Senate was summoned by emergency decree. The war was declared over. The traitorous Jedi had been defeated. The Republic was to be restructured for the sake of security. Palpatine stood before them, his face scarred by Jedi treason, his voice thunderous with victory. "In order to ensure our continued safety," he said, "the Republic will be reorganized into the First Galactic Empire." Thunderous applause. Senators cheered. The Republic died, not in war, but in ovation, and beneath the ruins of the temple. Darth Vader did not weep. He stood in the fire, a blade still humming, and saw only her Padme safe in the future he believed. He had purchased with death, but the Force had begun to fracture. Balance was broken, and in the silence of the ash-covered halls, the ghosts of the Jedi began to gather. When the temple burns, it is not the fire that devours hope. It is the silence left behind the void where wisdom once stood, now filled by shadow. The Skywalker has chosen. The serpent's whisper has become the voice of law, and the dream of peace has become a nightmare from which the galaxy cannot wake. Chapter 17. The Fire That Does Not Burn End. So the Emperor unleashed his final gambit. Not in secret, not with cunning, but with a roaring silence that swallowed stars. The sky above Coruscant turned to iron, veined with the black arteries of star destroyers and shadowed transports. The temple of the Jedi, once a sanctuary of balance, became an altar. It was here that fire was sent, not to consume flesh, but to consume memory, to erase the breath of light from the bones of the galaxy. And leading that fire, cloaked in blackened code and burning visions, walked Anakin Skywalker, the once child of prophecy. Not yet a machine, not yet a ghost, merely a man possessed by destiny. He came not with armies, but with silence, cloaked in the 501st, his chosen. The gates opened for him, not because they failed to see, but because they believed too deeply that he would never bring death. But the Force, that ancient ocean, whispered differently. It did not scream in warning. It wept. The younglings bowed, their heads before him, expecting rescue. He ignited his blade in reply. Not red, not yet, but the blue of skies now lost, of a life he no longer claimed. And through the long hallways of knowledge, through the echoing rotundas where holocrons once floated in peaceful defiance of gravity, he moved like a dark wind. No Jedi struck him, no master rose in time. The flame was too sudden, the betrayal too complete. Elsewhere, the temple burned not from the outside, but from within. The Force, bound to the stones of that place, cried out with every death. Some say it echoed through the cores of distant worlds, felt as dreams in children not yet born. A wound opened in the galaxy, and its scar would never close. Obi-Wan, lost in exile upon Utapau, did not feel it fully, only a cold hand brushing across his spine. Yoda crouched in the smoke of Kashyyyk knew. He dropped his staff. He whispered the word that ended 1,000 years of trust. Betrayed. Anakin did not mourn what he did. In those first hours, he still told himself it was mercy, that the Republic must be cleansed, that the Jedi, by hiding power and fearing change, had birthed the darkness they now faced. In his heart he still believed Padma would be saved. If only he ended the war, if only he served a higher power, if only he broke every oath. Love had become a sword, and it swung in his hand like justice. And Palpatine, who had promised order, offered Anakin a new name, not yet allowed, not in titles carved in stone, but in the dark chambers beneath the Senate, where Sith echoes murmured from walls forged in old hatred. "You are not a Jedi," he said. "You are the future." And Anakin believed. Then came Mustafar, that scarred planet of lava and ash, a forge, not of metal, but of identity. Here, Sidious sent his apprentice to cut the final chords. The separatist leaders, once pawns, were slaughtered without pause. Wat Tambor, Newt Gunray, San Hilda, architects of chaos, died pleading, not understanding that they were no longer necessary, that they had never been. And Anakin, still not Vader, still caught between names, stood amid their corpses and spoke to himself. He told Padme's name to the fire. He said it was for her, that every act was a seed of their future peace. But the fire did not answer. It only consumed. It does not burn, it remakes. Podmam followed him, not with doubt, but with love too. Great to stop. She descended into the inferno with hope clutched like a dying flower. She did not know what she would find. She could not imagine what he had become. And when she saw him, standing with eyes too bright, voice too calm, she reached for the boy from Tatooine and touched only shadow. "You're breaking my heart," she said. And for a heartbeat, something broke inside him too, but it did not shatter. It twisted. He saw Obi-Wan standing behind her, and he believed because he must that she had betrayed him too. The duel was not between master and apprentice. It was between future and past, between what might have been and what now must be. On catwalks, above rivers of fire, they fought not to win, but to be heard. And the Force screamed through both of them, weeping in their fury. "I have the high ground," said Kenobi, and Anakin leapt, because pride cannot kneel, because fear cannot yield. And the flame caught him not from above, but from within. Limbs severed, skin scorched, dreams shattered. He burned alone. The fire did not kill him, it forged him, and when he screamed, it was not pain, it was birth. Obi-Wan turned away, not because he lacked mercy, but because the thing before him was no longer Anakin. Not fully, not anymore. The man he loved like a brother was gone, burned into myth, fallen into legend. And so he left the body. Let the Force decide. Sidious came then, cloaked in joy, finding his creation still breathing. He lifted the broken frame of his apprentice with hands that had once sculpted empires, and he carried him not to healing, but to transformation. In the operating chamber of the damned, the machines began. They did not ask, they did not wait, they replaced, they erased. The last of Anakin's breath fled into the respirator. The last of his touch faded into metal. The fire was complete, and when the masks sealed, and the breath began that sounder. Storm began to echo across the galaxy. It would never stop. It would follow every scream, every silence, every lie and truth. He rose not as a man, not as a Jedi, not even as a Sith, but as something else, a vessel for despair, a monument to what hope must never forget. They called him Darth Vader, and the galaxy, still burning, turned to face the shadow. Chapter 18. Ash in the mouth of the Force, and so, in the deepest hollows of the Force, where memory coils like breathless mist and prophecy dissolves into silence, the echo of Anakin Skywalker faded, not vanished, never that, but buried beneath the weight of a name no longer his. Darth Vader, black-garbed and chained to a respirator's breath, rose not from victory but from loss, and the Force wept in places the stars could not reach. For a moment in galactic time, all futures bent around this wound. The Chosen One had not brought balance. He had broken the scale itself. The Jedi were ash now, not only in body, but in meaning. Their temple once a beacon, atop Coruscant stood silent, haunted by absence. Their code, their creed, their ancient lineage, ended not with war, but with betrayal, and across 1,000 systems, survivors turned to stone, hunted, forgotten, hiding like embers that refuse to go out. Yoda, exiled in Dagobah's murk, Obi-Wan, buried in Tatooine's sand. Each clung to the old truths as if they were relics, waiting for time to breathe them back to life. But time had no breath. Not in the Empire. Palpatine stood at the heart of this new order, not as tyrant, but as savior. To the galaxy, he was peace incarnate. To the broken Senate, he was necessity. To the fearful, he was protection. And to Vader, his creature, he was everything. Master, maker, mirror, the man who called him my friend as his flesh burned, the voice that whispered in his mind when silence threatened to let truth return. No longer was he the slave from Tatooine, no longer was he the Padawan with bright eyes, no longer the lover, the father-to-be, the hero. Those threads had been severed in fire. What remained was a hollow helm, a voice like thunder, a will built not on hope but on the absence of it. And yet, the Force never forgets. In the silence between breaths, something else stirred. Not rebellion, not vengeance, but a question, one the dark could not erase. Was this the will of the Force, or its greatest perversion? Whispers returned in time, not to Vader, but around him. Whispers of a child born in pain, hidden from both prophecy and power. Padme, who died of heartbreak, had not died in vain. For in secret, on a world the Empire did not know, her children lived, twins, born into shadow, one day to bring light. But Vader did not know. Palpatine ensured it. The Emperor, who feared nothing, feared this hope reincarnated. And so he buried it deep beneath lies and the smothering breath of the Sith, and the galaxy turned. Years passed, like echoes. The stars spun, systems bent, and the Empire grew fat upon its throne. It fed on fear. It drank the silence of ruined worlds. Vader, its blade, struck down the last embers of resistance. He crushed uprisings, hunted Jedi, tore apart entire bloodlines. But each act did not strengthen him. It hollowed him further. He was not man. He was momentum. And yet the Force whispered still, in the dark chambers of his solitude, in the quiet between kills, in the faint flickering dream of a name he no longer said. Padme, it haunted him, not in love, but in loss. And through that wound a light crept in, one he denied, one Palpatine could not extinguish. Then came a name, Luke. The boy did not come as a warrior. He came as a spark, untrained, reckless, but true. And Vader, upon hearing the name, felt something in him, twisted with hatred, but with remembrance. For the first time in decades, the man within the armor stirred, not fully, but a shadow of what once was. The son had come, and with him destiny returned. They clashed, father and child, blade against blade. But it was not death that loomed between them. It was choice. For Vader, long thought lost to fate, found himself faced not with defeat, but with a mirror. Luke stood where Anakin once had, and unlike the father, the son refused to fall. I feel the conflict within you, Luke said. Let go of your hate. And for a breathless moment, Anakin heard himself. Palpatine, sensing danger, struck. Lightning not of storm, but of spirit. It arced into the child, burning, breaking, and Vader watched not as a Sith but as a father. The choice came, not in fire, not in prophecy, but in love. He lifted the Emperor, not in anger, but in surrender, in sacrifice. And he hurled him into the abyss, not to win, but to end. And in that act, Anakin returned, not in body that was already ash, but in soul, the Force. Long wounded, healed a little. The balance, once broken, wavered back toward light. The mask cracked. The breath slowed. And beneath it, the eyes of the chosen one, not Vader, looked upon his son. Tell your sister, you were right, he whispered. There is good in me. And with that breath, the fire finally left him, not in torment, but in peace, ash to ash. The pyre burned on Endor, not in mourning, but in remembrance, the armor empty, the machete silent, the shadow dash gone, and in the sky above, the Force opened, a light beyond death, and from it, 3 figures emerged. Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Anakin. Whole the galaxy had not healed, but it had begun. Because in the mouth of the Force, where all stories end, only love survives, and the fire that did not burn finally went out.